Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Johan Berger, and I'm the Head of Executive Education at the College of Business and Economics of the UAEU. As such, it is my privilege to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon on the topic of BRICS. BRICS, acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has been on the forefront of many newspapers and publications globally after its August meeting in South Africa, where it was enlarged from the original 5 members, original in the sense that before August 2023, up until 11. The question that goes around is now, what does this mean? How and when impact, what kind of impact can we foresee with a new enlarged BRICS? Now, it is my privilege to have with us this afternoon 3 gentlemen that would help us address some of the uncertainties and questions surrounding the new BRICS and the old BRICS for that matter. First, we have Mr. Sido Bustani. My screen right bottom. Sido, if you can just raise your hand. Sido is the Managing Director of SWIFT for Middle East, Africa, and South and Central Asia. He's been in various leadership positions for the last 16 years rather. He has a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's in mechanical engineering. We then also have Associate Professor Usman Khalid, who's my top left corner in the blue suit. Dr. Usman has a PhD from Lund University in Sweden. In addition to his field of economics, he's been involved in a lot of consulting for PwC here in the Middle East, for institutions in Malaysia and also in Pakistan, and quite widely published, which is also the case for Dr. Sasi Gopalan. Sasi is, or has a PhD rather, from George Mason University in the USA. Sasi also has quite widely published and is developer of an index on the competitiveness of emerging market countries. A lot of experience in Singapore, who is involved with some of the leading universities there, in Kazakhstan, and also in Hong Kong. So you can understand why these 3 people would then be able to address some of the topics that we will be addressing this afternoon on the issue of the BRICS and its expansion. To set the scene, I am going to show you a slideshow with a few slides addressing some of the more salient topics, which would then set the scene for, and the context rather, for the discussion. We will also not have a scenario where each one has a short period of time, but where we will rather address a question one at a time. Any of you have questions, please do not hesitate to use the chat function to post a question, which I will then hand over to the panel members. Mr. Sido Bustani unfortunately needs to leave us at about 2:30, and Dr. Sasi might leave us early as well, given prior commitments. All right, on that note then, I am going to share my screen to show you the you can see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Right. If we look at the rise of the BRICS, early to late 1995 or 1995, you would see they were about 17% of the global GDP at the purchasing power parity, with the G7 countries being used as a contrast of the size and the importance from a GDP perspective of the BRICS. The G7 then referring to Canada, the USA, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. This 17%, 15 years later, grew to close to 27%. And by 2023, prior to the admittance of the new 6 members, which we will address now, the GDP of these 5 countries on a purchasing power parity basis had grown to 32%. The BRICS countries as such, prior to the expansion, 42% of global population. And we're looking at, after the addition of these 6 new countries, we will be looking at about a 46% of the global population. Energy, we're looking at 43% after the addition. 43% of global oil production will now be settled or focused in these 11 countries. This is literally a 22.8% increase, well, an added 22.8% of global oil production than prior to the new countries joining BRICS. Also, 5 of the world's biggest food producers will then be in BRICS. And we're looking at 36% of the global land mass. This is just putting together the ones that I've had a look at there. On a actual real dollar value, you're looking at 29%. This is with the new members, and about 36.9% were you to add the 6 new people. From a country-specific perspective, you can see there, this is real dollars. China being the biggest, with India, Brazil, and Russia making sizable contributions. And then with the 6 new countries from Saudi Arabia around to the UAE, adding then quite a number of, quite a sizable amount of GDP, but not as big as the initial 5 members. Those are the actual numbers. Then if you look at the addition of the 6 countries which has been identified, that have been invited, has been identified as Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran, brings up, from a purchasing power parity basis, the BRICS plus to $64 trillion, which is 36.9%, as I've said, of the total GDP. But as one can see, the numbers, and here more specifically on a size chart, that China still dwarfs the other countries, with an India at 11.8 billion, Russia 4.7, and then going down to Brazil, Saudi 2.15, etc. You can see there, Egypt, Iran, Argentina 1.2 trillion, South Africa 953 billion, and UAE 828, and Ethiopia at $358 billion. This is on a purchasing power parity basis. If one compares, because this is a comparison that's made frequently, the countries that we looked at together with, compare it against rather the G7 countries, we can see the old BRICS countries, rather, the existing BRICS countries. When you compare the per capita GDP on a purchasing power parity basis, they are still quite smaller than the G7 countries as far as per capita GDP is concerned. For the simple reason that the populations of the G7 countries on the one hand, and then where it is relevant, the size of the GDP is considerably smaller than those of the 7 countries in the G7. In terms of population, I mentioned the fact that the new BRICS would actually house 46% of the global population, settled in 11 countries. Yeah, the original 5 would have a much larger contribution, given the fact that you're sitting with India and China, which between them have about 35.5, 36% of global population. Oil production, I've mentioned 43%, with all 5 of the 6 new countries making a contribution, some of them quite smaller, with Ethiopia making no contribution, but it is significant that the new countries more than double the contribution of BRICS to global oil production. In terms of exports, 25% of the world's exports come from the BRICS plus countries. And I think that is more or less what I, at this stage of the game, would like to share. So let me just get that out. Great. Ladies and gents, I think without further ado, I would like to get into the questions for which you have come to hear the experts speak. And I think I would like to start off in its current format. How successful has the BRICS been? I mean, it is not a trading bloc. And has anything been done that reflects BRICS as a trading bloc, contributing, making a contribution to each other and to the world in general? Gentlemen, over to you.
I can start if you want, Johan.
Please, Cedar.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe if we can take a step back, you know, why BRICS countries have been, this association of countries have been created. And I think it revolves around two important items, which is the economy and the geopolitics. So what do we mean by economy is enhance, you know, economic cooperation, foster economic ties, trade, investment among, you know, those member nations. And obviously also advocating for, you know, South-to-South cooperation. I think that is the one important block of, you know, what the BRICS country would want to achieve. On the other side is more on the geopolitics, which is the political dialogue, you know, engage in more political discussion and global issues, and obviously promoting a multipolar world order rather than having only coming it from the Western countries, and somehow, you know, counter the Western dominance. So yeah, this would be, you know, the two important elements, the two important drivers for this creation of BRICS. Now, what has been achieved, you know, over the last few years? So it's been created in 2009, if my memory is good, so around like 15 years ago. So there has been a creation of this new development bank, which is a kind of, you know, allowing the establishment of this bank is allowing to offer opportunities for members, you know, to access funding for infrastructure, sustainable development projects, and so on. So a kind of a competitor to what we have in terms of World Bank or IMF or all of that. So this has been there and has been created. We've seen also an important, you know, the objective was to have an increase of trade among, you know, those countries. And if we look at the trade among BRICS countries, you know, it moved from around, you know, beginning of the century, $30 billion. And today, you know, 20 years after or 25 years after is more than $400 billion. So it has achieved somehow, you know, the development of trade between those countries. And obviously, I mean, this is difficult to how do you say, to measure, but there is also sharing knowledge and expertise, you know, whether it is in technology, in education, in healthcare. So that would be, you know, the three areas where there has been some achievement, you know, based on what were the initial drivers.
Johan, can I jump in here?
Please.
And well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thanks for the nice set of pictures you showed, which you set the context really nicely. But I'm going to try and say something which is probably very unpopular, and I will try to sound very profound, but what I'm going to say is incredibly banal, right? So now, the first part, what I want to clarify is that, you know, in construction, we all believe that bricks are essential for construction of a good wall. But if you look closely at the actual original conceptualization of the idea of brick economies, there is absolutely no meaning to that, right? There is no bricks behind the idea of a brick. You know, if you go back to, I mean, that's my personal take. There is no sound guiding principle. Yes, there is an economic reasoning when Jim O'Neill came up with this. In fact, some commentators argue that it was way back. But when he coined this phrase, all he was just trying to say was, hey, guys, watch out for these countries. There is space for these countries. They are growing fast, and they are becoming the next, economic, they are front runners, and just you have to make way for them in the multilateral system. That's as in his own words. In fact, somewhere I read one of his commentaries where he himself admitted that this is the idea behind him coming up with this terminology. Right? There was no thought to it. It was not a political formation. It was not heralded as an anti-Western alliance, or it was not supposed to be turning the world upside down. Right? Now, this was all rhetoric that came later, much later. People took it in a very convenient way. They started using it as an alternative geopolitical tool, and well, we are going to challenge the Western imperialistic tendencies and whatnot, right? So now you have to separate the facts from the fiction. And if you look at it as to what has actually happened in the last 20 years, of course, all these economies have grown, have had their own strengths, have had their own weaknesses, right? I mean, it's just like any other fast-growing emerging market. Why just stop at BRIC? I mean, if you look at any other country, they've had their own domestic compulsions to open up. They have done very well for themselves in many, many ways. Just to state the standard cliche. I mean, they've had their good days and they've had their bad days, right? I mean, but as a group, if you're talking about as a block, what have they achieved? I mean, apart from like what Sido actually pointed out was one of the points I had written down as well, apart from the formation of the bank, the BRICS Development Bank, which was coined again later on, was as NDB, right? The New Development Bank. Apart from that, there is no real flagship statement that this bloc has made over the years, right? I mean, people try to lean on this as a bloc because you want to use it to fit your narrative that this is going to create an alternative world order. And I personally believe that until recently, when the expansion came about and the whole topic of this webinar that we're doing right now, there was nobody really bothered with this. I mean, they just keep occasional references to this as an emerging market superstars and how they are doing. But actually, if you look closely, there were a lot more emerging markets technically in the way, I mean, there's no agreement on how you define it. But even if you go with the conventional definitions, you see a lot more countries like Indonesia from the other side, for example, or you have a lot of other countries which have done very well. And they are in fast growing emerging markets. So this the context in which this whole the development is happening.
I think one aspect why and I agree with Susi on this is that they don't have a clear agenda, right? What they want to achieve, they don't agreed upon clear agenda like ASEAN, for example, right? And also the bureaucracy is missing. There is no permanent bureaucracy to guide them or to build a consensus. So I think that is one aspect as well that I think is important.
But Usman, Sasi, given what you've said, I agree with you, and I agree with Sido talking about the contribution of the New Development Bank. It has something like 90 projects that has financed to the amount of something like $32 billion.
33 billion. Yeah.
44 countries were lining up. Half of them applied and other half indicated we're interested. Why would they then be so keen as to join the BRICS if there's no value in it for them?
No. So if I mean, honestly, please. I don't think that BRIC on its own, meant anything. But the fact that we keep talking about this global south, nobody knows what it means, honestly, right? Nobody, none of us here. I mean, I can vouch there is no single agreed upon definition of what is the global south and who is the leader and the champion of the global south. Even when you talk about emerging markets and developing economies, there is so much heterogeneity in the way these economies are functioning. It's very hard to draw a common denominator across the board in terms of interest, right? So now suddenly you see this interest coming along only because of the discontent with the existing order. That has been on for a very long time. I mean, everybody here agrees that they have been ignored for far too long, and their interests have to be represented. They are looking for a leader to come along the way, and every now and then you have a country coming up and saying, we represent your interests. I'm not going to name any particular country here, but to make sure I'm not saying anything politically incorrect. But at the end of the day, when somebody is championing yourself as, or him or him, the country as for for a good cause, then most often they're not the motives are questioned at the end of the day. So what's in it for you at the end of the day is what drives. So all these 44 countries queuing up have something to gain. I mean, just pure economics. I mean, forget about the geopolitical.
Yeah.
We have no data on that. Just the sheer market size. I mean, there is something in it for everyone. I mean, I can have a trade agreement with you. I can have a agreement on capital flows. I can benefit from investments, and I can, make sure that I can score politically back home. If I can do a good job of it, well, I can also be burned. I mean, so this is the way I look at it. Anyway, I think I'm making a conversation.
But okay, Sasi, I'm going to come back to you. You just now said that economically not something really happening. Now you say the guys would join for the economic part thereof. Clarify that for me. I lost you there.
As a bloc, they have not done anything great. But as an individual country, in a bilateral basis, I mean, if you see them being represented somewhere, you feel like there is an opportunity for them to be associated with these countries in other forms. Maybe there is some legitimacy involved in being part of a global South alliance, if you want to call that. And that's as simple as that, right? That's how I look at it.
Okay. On that note, Sita, I'm going to jump over to you because I would hate you to leave at past and me not having asked you the questions that are on my mind. You spoke about, and Sasi also referred to the new development bank, and we have the common, the common, or CRA, the common reserve arrangement. And you spoke about also the fact that it has been punted as an alternative to the World Bank, to the IMF, and even to SWIFT itself. We have issues such as there were calls for a BRICS currency. We're talking about the de-dollarization. I'm putting a lot of issues on the table, and you can answer them as you see fit and as you go along. And also the fact that, okay, the BRICS currency, I'm not sure whether that goes along with the dollarization, but then trading in local currencies, which reminds one of the Pan-African payment and settlement system of the African Development Bank, which you would have intimate knowledge of being involved with SWIFT. How do these things pan out? How valid are they? If we're looking at BRICS, is the new development bank rather, is it really an alternative, a realistic alternative to the World Bank and IMF? Is the CRA a realistic alternative to the IMF and SWIFT? Is BRICS pay something really that we can embrace and say this is the route to go for the non-aligned movement, which Sasi has shown us there's no clear definition of? It's a lot that I'm putting on your plate, but
okay. So I'll try.
Deal with that for us.
I'm going to be answered everything. Otherwise, I'll be talking for the next half an hour. But maybe, and maybe just to come back on what Sasi was saying. Obviously, you have an objective to achieve. Usually, it's a bumpy road. I mean, you take European Union is, it comes also with challenges. Today. Yeah. You don't have a homogeneous, 27 countries in Europe and so on. I mean, not that I am comparing the European Union with the BRICS country. I think, BRICS countries are still far away, but at least they have, some objectives to achieve on the economical and on the political side. Now, to get there, obviously, is not going to be an easy road. And indeed, there are some economic disparities, between, and we've seen it on your slide, Johan, you have the big China, you have India, and then you have the smaller countries. So these economic disparities does not help, to have homogeneous approach there. And then also geopolitics, within the BRICS countries, you have challenges. You look at China, you look at India, they want to be together within the BRICS. They have some common objectives, but at the same time, they have, some challenges between the two countries, the border between China and India and all of that. So yeah, it's always difficult. At the end of the day, everybody is trying to push their own interest, whether it is on the Western Bloc, whether it is on the, South Bloc, but at least trying, if there is some common basis where we can push together, this is what they would want to do. And that's on the economical and on the geopolitical, but at the same time, it brings some challenges. Now, coming back to your point about, for example, you were mentioning de-dollarization. I mean, the first question one needs to ask is, okay, so you want to replace the dollar, then the question is, with what? What is the alternative? New currency? You know, it took maybe 30 years, you know, for Europe to create the euro, and it was more or less homogeneous economies, which is not the case here. So is it something which is really potentially going to happen? Question mark. Do you want to go for a leading currency within BRICS, you know, such as the yuan? But, you know, will all the members of BRICS will be happy to have that? Example, India, you know, as they're pushing also for rupee. And if we look at the last, you know, 15 years, just looking at Africa, for example, we've been looking at trade flows in Africa, how much was traded in yuan, Chinese yuan. It's been the same for the last, you know, 10 years, more or less, you know, 5-6%. Most of it is done in USD. So, and then, you know, and then the third thing is, if you are to choose, you know, a currency which is within BRICS, you know, you need to look at the balance of trade. You know, you want to make sure. So today, for example, when you have Russia trading with India, the balance of trade is in favor of Russia. So Russia ends up with too many rupees that for which they don't know what to do with it. So, you know, at the end of the day, yes, one would want, you know, to have an alternative. The question is, which one? Is there an alternative? Is there a trust in this alternative? At one stage, you know, currency, the countries were looking at alternative for rupees and ruble, you know, when there was and they were looking at dirham. Dirham was a good alternative because dirham has been pegged to the dollar for the last 50 years. So it brings back, you know, to the trust. So basically what I'm trying to say is, yeah, de-dollarization, one can think about it, but then one needs to think about what is the, you know, what would be the reasonable approach for that. And it's not an easy answer for this one. And perhaps the last point from my side, because I don't want to, you know, to just keep talking from my side. You were talking about the new development bank. Obviously, you know, they want to, the countries of the BRICS wants to have, you know, opportunities to access funding for their infrastructure and their development project. But again, here, when we look at new development bank, so coming back to those contradictions that you may have in BRICS, so coming to SASI, this is funded in dollar. You know, if one would want to have a new development bank, they would want to have it maybe in another currency, especially if people would want, they're talking about de-dollarization. So yes, there is a driver, there is a goal, but it's not easy to get there because you don't have a homogeneous, you know, block there with different, you know, different interests, which makes it obviously a bit different, a bit difficult. So voilà, just wanted maybe to share that, share that with you.
Sasi, you something at the bit to contribute.
I had 3 points here about whatever Sido had said. I think I completely agree with everything he said. I'm just going to like rank them in the order of rhetoric rather than potential, right? So everybody talks about this as the next, the voice of the global south sort of an argument. That is still a long way to go, and we don't know what it means, right? Now, de-dollarization comes right next, right? And again, Usman and I were having a chat just before the webinar, and I'll let him elaborate on that. I wouldn't take his points here, but we were talking about the trading currencies and reserve currencies, and you got to distinguish between that. And then the fact is that we have a long way out from you know, replacing the dollar as a reserve currency. But trading wise, yes, there are things happening there, and I'll let him talk about that. But that's those two things are, you know, something to keep in mind when we are discussing these issues. But the most, from my perspective, the most potential, the positive, finally I'm saying something positive about this is based on what Sido has mentioned, is about the bank, the New Development Bank, right? And now this financing angle of New Development Bank, this is the only, the way I look at it, it's just strictly my personal opinion, and obviously there is some data to support this claim that with the expansion, what you do see is a lot of potential with some countries with deep pockets, like where we are right now, United Arab Emirates, and then you have Saudi Arabia. And now that could open the doors for financing options for the bank, which could, enrich their resources that they have, that could replenish them. Right now, it takes the weight off these 5 countries and the ways to raise financing. And that, of course, it comes with its own strings attached. But at the end of the day, at least with that, you have potentially a lot of wider set of opportunities opening up for you, right? And again, how is this going to sit with AIIB and their efforts to push forward with BRI? It's another ballgame, it's another webinar for another day, but that's something that you need to keep that in mind. So there are too many competing interests going on, but at least from the face of it, if you look at NBD as a potent force, because it's quite democratic, all of these members have equal representation, nobody's vetoing anyone else, and these interests can be sidestepped, and you can actually have a democratic, decent conversation amongst the people. Then with the expansion, then at least with the financing sources expanding, then perhaps you have a way forward. So those are the 3 main points that I would say from BRICS to BRICS Plus. The 3 things around which you see a lot of commentators, a lot of things, but where I see the most potential is the financing angle from the New Development Bank. Even though it's not challenge the IMF, but it's just
I think
this one.
Yeah, I think I would like to add here also that de-dollarization will only work if obviously reserve currency will be replaced. So I was listening to the Minister of Economy's, UAE's Minister of Economy's interview with Bloomberg, and he was rightly saying that we need to distinguish between reserve currency and trading currency, right? So UAE is already trading a lot with India and China in their own currencies. But I would also like to highlight that the move away from the dollar will be difficult until your oil is being traded in other currencies, right? And as of right now, oil is essentially being traded in US dollar rather than
but there has been a change, Usman. Some trades have
recently taken
place in rupee.
Rupee, yeah, that's what Sido mentioned, that Russia is now left with a lot of rupees, which they don't know what to do with, right? Yeah. So this is a challenge, essentially, whether we are currency
convertibility is a real issue, not, right? Right. So yeah, unless convertibility is guaranteed, you're not going to be able to succeed much on that front. But at least where NDB can make a difference here, the development bank is at least they are providing some impetus towards efforts to raise financing through the local currency bond markets, right? If you look at actually what they're doing in these countries, they've done it only in China and Russia in the last few years, but they are promising to move towards Brazil and India at some stage. So the point is that if that is actually a healthier move, right? Because that is in some sense you're talking about raising financing in local currencies or BRICS plus currencies, which reduces the dependency away from US dollar, and that you're at least walking the talk in some sense by trying to do that, but still the numbers are very small compared to what happens otherwise. But that is something to look into. That's part of where the potential is.
I would thank you for that input. It makes a lot of sense. I think I've compared it also to the Pan-African payment and settlement system, where in Africa, you buy something in Ghana, you pay in their currency, and you receive something in, a local currency in Kenya, for argument's sake. So there needs to be collaboration and cooperation at central bank level to make this thing work. If we look at the countries that have been invited, if I were to look at, for example, a UAE and a Saudi Arabia, it makes sense for BRICS to bring them within the fold, given the contribution to oil production, because suddenly now you have a huge, not control, but influence, remembering that's still an OPEC, where the real influence lies. But also from a new development bank, you're sitting with two countries with huge funding, with both of them huge sovereign wealth funds that can contribute funding to the new development bank. But if we then take a step back and you're looking at Iran, what contribution comes from there? And why an Iran and not a Turkey? Which from a political perspective, an influence rather, let's put it this way, an economy perspective is a much larger contributor than Iran would have been the case. And then you bring in Egypt. Yes, Egypt's part of Africa, but it's actually also seen as part and parcel of the Middle East as far as that is concerned. How does one make sense of the choice of the countries that we're looking at from this part of the world? Egypt, UAE, Saudi, and Iran, and why not to Turkey?
So I think from my perspective, it is about political alignment, right? So how these countries are aligned. Are they aligned towards the West or towards or they're more open to multilateralism or so on and so forth. So if you look at UAE, for example, UAE is always like focusing mainly on multilateralism. They have one foot in the West, but they're also essentially increasing or improving their ties with the East as well, right? So the same with Saudi Arabia. You can think about India as well, the same idea, right? So they are one foot in the West and one foot in the East, essentially. And Egypt is the same story. So I think given that Turkey is more aligned towards not towards the West per se, but towards the European Union, I think that may be one of the reasons why Turkey is not invited, maybe.
Right. Usman, on that note, why then and Iran?
Iran, obviously, right? They have oil, right? So I was reading somewhere that it has become now BRICS plus OPEC, right? Almost. So essentially, they have oil, and they are very against the Western rhetoric that.
But now you have this tension between the UAE and Saudi on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand, for quite a while.
But that tension was always there before even joining or expanding the BRICS. You had the tension between China and India, which is much greater compared to the tension between Saudi and Iran, for example, right? So they almost went to war a couple of years back.
What you've been telling me, Usman, is that although they differ at some levels, they manage to collaborate at other levels. Iran being a member of OPEC together with the other two, and yet they function and they collaborate there. And the same thing with China and India. Your view,
I think,
Sido?
Yeah, so just maybe to complement what Usman was saying, and maybe a step back also on the process, admitting new group. Obviously, this is the first time they're doing it since inception, because you mentioned the fact that 40 countries plus were interested, 20 they show interest, and then only 6 were chosen. And I believe the group is cautious, not expanding too quickly. I think that's something which is to keep a bit of focus and coherence within the group. I think this is one of the things they've been looking at. And there is no formal process for meeting those new members. At the end of the day, it's the decision of the members. Even though one country can meet all the criteria, you could still be denied, membership. If you take Morocco, Morocco, which is a diversified economy and so on, maybe not as big as the rest of the economies which are there, but there is some tension for Sahrawi Republic, which is not recognized by Morocco, but which is recognized by South Africa. So, all of these things needs to be taken into account. So there are a number of factors, geopolitical sensitivity, economical consideration that needs to be taken into account before accepting or not accepting economies, countries. Right. So this is important to have this in mind. And then, yes, every country is different to another country, even in the Western world, but you have some common interests. So what are the common interests that you can put together, which will allow you to create this association versus, the other things which does not keep you together? So what they have been looking at is what are the common ground that you may have. And yes, two things again is about, economy. So having, Saudi Arabia and so on coming in, like Usman said, it's a kind of OPEC plus, another OPEC which can have a major influence there if need be at some stage. And then, on the geopolitical side, you want to make sure that you are a bloc which is countering a bit the Western world. So this is what I guess they've been looking at when choosing all those countries.
Yeah. See, on that point, you referred to Morocco. Morocco didn't apply, although South African spokesperson did say, and Morocco was very adamant, we did not apply. However, Algeria did apply. And both of their economies are far greater than, for example, that of Ethiopia. The sophistication levels of their economies are also much higher. Why would we get on board an Ethiopia but ignore the application from an Algeria, which is what, the fourth largest economy in Africa?
Yeah, obviously I was not there for the discussion, so I have no clue. What I can, what I can just suggest is that, if you look Algeria and Nigeria, for example, the two areas. So Nigeria and Algeria, both of them are strong economies, but they are relying mainly on oil and gas, not diversified economies like we can have in UAE. So maybe this is something which pushed back a bit. That's one thing. Second is maybe they're looking also at the level of population. If you look at Ethiopia and Egypt, these are the two largest populated countries in Africa. So that's also maybe one of the reasons, one of the criteria they chose, even though economies are lower than, the other ones, but they have a more, greater population. So having maybe a stronger weight there. And you were mentioning in on your slide, GDP of BRICS plus, is around, represent around 40%, more or less 40% of the world, population is around 45%. So I guess, they're taking all these criteria into account in order to choose the countries, but at the same time, not expanding, being a bit cautious, not expanding too much, because it's already difficult to have a bit of homogeneous approach, knowing all the challenges within those existing BRICS countries. So you want to do it, step by step if you don't want the whole thing to blow up.
Right. If I may jump in right there, Johan, I think that's definitely the supply side view, right? Supply meaning from the BRICS point of view, right? But then also the demand side view is important. Do countries in the first place, like say Indonesia, for example, right? It has obviously would have liked to be part of it, but probably it chose not to. So it's not necessarily that the grouping is stopping them from joining, but maybe as a country, I feel maybe something very simple. I'll just wait and see what you actually, can you walk the talk? Can it become a potent force to deliver on some agreed goals, shared goals and vision that we have come up with? And to what extent are we going to make progress towards that? And then if I see things are moving in the direction, then maybe I will strengthen my interest in being part of such a grouping. If not, it's just going to be another acronym or nobody can pronounce, and probably it will just relegate into some sort of meaningless or into oblivion, right? So that's probably I mean, again, we are speculating. It's your word against mine. Like Sito said, we were not part of the discussion. Nobody has any clue on earth about why these countries chose to go and why. And if you read the commentaries all over, everybody's coming up with some sort of a conspiracy theory or speculating this or that. But I mean, we don't have to do that. But at the end of the day, I think something very practical that we can at least admit is that you want to know what is actually this grouping going to do at the end of the day, right? I mean, what BRIC has been doing for 20 years, it still seems like an acronym that has not delivered on anything major, anything like a statement, like a G7 to a G20 to, you know, a formal organization that can actually have directives. So now we are on the cusp of something. Perhaps there is a lot of potency, there's a lot of potential. So maybe if things do go in the direction, maybe I'll be very happy to join the party. I mean, that's the way probably some countries might be thinking. I mean, it's just again speculation. So.
Sasi, you have a lot of experience in Southeast Asia, being from or having spent a considerable time in Singapore. Indonesia actually applied to be a member, and it was decided they would be invited. And when they were invited, they said, thank you, we will then stand back. What is a potential reason that? I was thinking maybe the fact that it is already a member of ASEAN and wanted to find out, you know, would this be against ASEAN's kind of guidelines, or it was sensitive to whatever its other ASEAN members would have said. But then there are quite a number of other countries, Thailand, etc., that also were keen to become a member of BRICS. Your views, if you have any. If you say, Johan, I haven't got a cooking clue, tell me, we move on.
No, actually, no. I mean, nothing more than what I already said. I believe Indonesia particularly is an interesting case here. I feel like they are taking a wait-and-see attitude. That's it. I mean, I don't know what changed in their minds at the last minute to say that they're going to take a step back and see what they're all about. But I also feel like it's becoming a new spaghetti bowl sort of a reference here, right? I mean, there's so many overlapping agreements and groupings, and I'm losing track of actually the acronyms. If you look at the infrastructure projects and the subgroupings and subgroupings, and so I guess a country would want to take a step back and decide if this is going to be ultimately beneficial for me, or should I just stay the multilateral route, like what Usman was talking about initially. So let's just wait and let's, you know, wave the flag, the white flag on all sides, and, you know, we will continue to bolster our ties with the US. We will try to do whatever we can do within ASEAN, and whatever that brings us, we will be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. We'll do this, and, you know, so I mean, I guess I feel that is probably the most pragmatic thing to do. I mean, if especially being in Singapore for all this while, I mean, and you know, you've been there yourself, and that is perhaps the most sought after idea. Like the most pragmatic thing to do would be to not side with any particular alliance, because with the hope that they are going to be the future of tomorrow, but you do want to have as much as you know, as much of an alliance as you can reach out to. So I believe that that's what the UAE is also doing right now. So.
Right.
And Johan, maybe just one sentence from my side. So maybe the other side, when looking from the other angle, is to say, you know, I don't want to put all my eggs in the same basket. So, you know, I will put a bit everywhere, and I will, you know, I will see which one I can influence. You know, one needs to look also at these things. You know, there are so many, like Sasi said, you know, so many associations in the world and so on. Some are efficient, others are less efficient. But as long as you can influence for your own interest, because one needs to remember, you know, the countries are doing all of that not for, you know, for the sake of maybe justice or whatever. They're doing it for their own interest, for their own country. So if there are ways, you know, to influence, why not? So then I will put my eggs a bit everywhere, and maybe half of my eggs would be in association which are not very efficient.
Right. But on that note, when you look at some of the new countries that have been invited, and even some of the existing ones, you will notice that they represent, in addition to BRICS and BRICS Plus for that matter, quite a considerable number of countries that are members of regional economic communities. You have in South America, you have Mercosur, where you're looking at two of the dominant countries is Brazil and Argentina. Argentina being now invited, despite the fact that they're sitting with triple-digit inflation. They have an election that is now being run off. Again, we don't know which way it's going to go. They still tend to be, or not tend to be, they are one of the world's largest lithium producers on the one hand, and they have a marginal oil production on the other hand. You're sitting with Egypt and Ethiopia, part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. You have the GCC, you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you have ASEAN, we mentioned that. So would this be an attractive thought for the existing country to say, if we invite these 6 extra, we not only get exposure in their countries and get their clout on, we get influence in a couple of regional economic communities globally that can be quite meaningful? Or is that a bit too far-fetched?
The answer is yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say yes, absolutely.
Yes to what? Being far-fetched or being relevant?
No, being relevant, that
Being
you know,
relevant.
you can influence. You can influence through those countries. You can influence the other association.
Others.
It's coming back. It's coming back to influencing, putting your interest in front.
Okay.
So I think if you look
Go ahead.
at UAE, for example, right, it's all about soft power. If you look at their 2071 plan, it's on their website that they want to enhance, diversify the economy, obviously, but they want to enhance their soft power. And what better way to do that by joining an association which accounts for, let's say, 45% of the world population, right? If I'm not wrong, right? So I think that goes back to looking after their own national interests, and if it serves their national interests, why not?
But then when you look at Saudi and the UAE, Saudi, you had something that you wanted to say before I go on with my story.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I think they've covered the basis. That's
Right.
exactly what I wanted to say. It's fine.
Right. If you look at the UAE and Saudi on the one hand, and you compare it to Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina, and Iran, it's chalk and cheese as far as I'm concerned when you look at economic contribution, efficiency, size of GDP, the nature of the infrastructure, government efficiency, etc. But so I would, for one, if I were BRICS, say, get them on board. In addition to the oil, you're getting well-functioning economies, growing at a rare rate of knots, making massive contribution. Infrastructure-wise, government efficiency-wise, it's a total different story. I want to take one step back in something that we've spoken about, and that is the ideology behind some of these countries. And Usman, I think you mentioned the fact that there's a pro-West and an anti-West scenario. Now, if I were a US, and this is now I'm speculating, and I look at 3 of my allies, Egypt, UAE, and Saudi, now becoming partners of something which has at times been quite anti-West and anti-US, specifically with China and Russia being quite on board. India being not so, and Brazil trying its utmost to be stable. South Africa and balanced with South Africa having a kind of a neutral stance as well. Would it be fair to say that the US has one of 2 options? They can see this move by these 3 countries, Egypt, UAE, Saudi, to become members of BRICS, can see that as a threat and then act accordingly, in the process alienating these 3 important allies in this part of the world. Or it can say, I see you, I'm comfortable, it gives me reach into a grouping of organizations that I can now influence via these 3, should these 3 be willing to do so. Or is that something too far-fetched? And together with that, is it typically these 3 telling US and the West, we are comfortable dealing with you, but no, we want to play with others as well. We don't want you as our only friend. We are comfortable. We will want to keep your friend, but we want to have other friends as well. Your views on something like that, a point of view of this nature?
So if you're purely looking from the US perspective, right? I would say that US has more to worry about the fact that 40 countries are willing to join BRICS, which is basically an informal grouping of countries, as we said, right? That is a more of a threat than UAE and Saudi joining BRICS. And that's my perspective, basically. Basically, what it is saying is that countries are now fed up with whatever is going on, the unilateral sanctions that are being imposed, so on and so forth, and they're moving or they're seeking alliances elsewhere.
So there's a stronger focus on multilateralism and embrace thereof to a much greater extent that's been in the past.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and let's not forget, if I may. So multilateralism is not happening since yesterday. It started, after the Second World War. You had in 1955, if my memory is good, you had the Bandung conference, where you had all the, we used to call them the Third World, getting together, India, China, and all of that. So it's not like, it did not take up, obviously, no ramp up there, but it was already there. There was, there was a willingness to have an alternative to US and to Russia. We have our own way, the third way. And I believe that, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, it has, the world ended up with one superpower, which is the US, and maybe it has created some unbalance in the world, and people are looking for to rebalance a bit of that. And basically the message is, especially for the last 10 years, if you look at the last 10 years, and especially in this region, where one day you are my friend, the other day you are my enemy. Look at just Turkey. Turkey was, not really welcome friendly here in the GCC, a few years ago, and now it is the other way around. So basically the message is, the relationship, those friendship changes. It's not like I'm married with you for the next 30 years. No, I am your friend, but I want to have other friends because I want to protect my interest. And that's the reason why people are seeking multilateral. All the more important that because my friend sometimes is positioning himself or herself not in the way that I wanted to. So that's the reason why I'm looking also to alternative. And this is where, countries are looking forward, to have ties with other countries. It doesn't mean that it is jeopardizing the existing one. It's just extending, so again, to protect their own interests.
Sasi, you had a point?
No, I just had a very, very different take on what, if I'm the US, I mean, again, personal opinion, I wouldn't be too bothered with whatever is happening. I mean, it's unpopular. I wouldn't be bothered. I mean, there are so many fissures between the countries with part of the grouping that I can exploit, so many conflicts that I can play up to. If I really want to be the devil's advocate, I can actually, sabotage this grouping in no time, because there are so many competing interests here. I mean, it's all well known and all commentators agree. There is no need to, exaggerate the threat that US would face because of this alliance. But having said that, I do want to add a caveat, which is that you don't want to take this for granted. Right? That's a simpler message, right? I mean, we don't ignore what is going on the other side of the world, because that is at your own peril. You don't want to do that. Definitely, they're coming together, and they are capable of putting their differences aside and moving ahead and looking for a bigger, trying to get this grouping to serve a larger purpose. Like what Sidhu said, there's an objective there, and we are trying to go towards that, and we have obstacles, we will overcome that. But they are not easy. It's going to be a very bumpy road, and it's very fragile, and it's already very fragile, and you do have that those vulnerabilities are showing up in every form, and they can be exploited very easily by the US if they want to, right? I mean, the question is whether do they want to do that, or do they actually want to do something else for a change, compared to what they've been doing all along in their history. Do I actually try to try to do something good rather than deepening the fissures and try to actually encourage multilateralism rather than corner everything. I mean, that's a question that really depends on who is going to be there or driving the helm in the US. And if you have presidencies playing to popular rhetoric like the ones we had in the past, in the recent past, well, I don't think they're going to be that magnanimous about that. But if there is, then there is at least some semblance of hope, is how I would think about it, right? Yeah. So. Right.
Okay.
And Johan, if I may add some. I don't know if it's a philosophical sentence, but at the end of the day, it's about human being. Human being, they're not robot, and it will remain the rule of the powerful. That's it. It's not about the rule of justice and all of that. Obviously, one would want to have more justice, etc., but it will remain the rule of the powerful. Hence, the reason why sometimes to counter this power is to find, alternative.
Indeed, and I think there's an old saying that countries do not have friends, they have interests. And you've made that point a couple of times this afternoon. So what's in the best interest of whoever is at play? You spoke also about the fissures that one finds in, or between the members of BRICS currently. And Sudha, you mentioned China and India. China with its BRI targeting a lot of countries globally, targeting even Africa and the whole of Africa. You're looking at India trying to respond via its the Asia-African growth corridor, which didn't really have legs. And then currently looking at the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which is just taken off. It remains to be seen to what extent it will be successful. But these are alternatives between existing members, which tells you very clearly that this is not a homogeneous grouping of people that are like-minded as far as economic interests are concerned and as far as ideological perspectives are concerned. They're in it for themselves. That old saying that goes with, what's in it for me? And that's what we see. I'm a bit worried, Asira, that your time has run out. Before I let the other people speak their minds, if you can just tell me, how do you see this going forward from your perspective? What does the next 5 to 10 years hold for a BRICS Plus?
I don't have the crystal ball.
Make it up.
The thing is, when you look at the last 10, 15 years, coming back to what I was saying before, the geopolitics have changed so much in the last 10, 15 years versus, the previous 50 years, that it's very difficult today to try to forecast something. It's really, really difficult, especially, people tend to change their friendship, relationship, it goes from enemies to friend and so on. So it's really, really difficult. And we see it, for example, with the last couple of weeks with the tragedies which are happening in Palestine and Israel. So, think this might trigger a new era. You never know. So it's very difficult. But at the end of the day, I think all the countries are looking to protect their interests, and sometimes by grouping themselves. The Western world also is not like one man. You have some also differences, for example, between Europe and US on the approach that they have in many areas. But at the end of the day, you do whatever it takes to protect your interest, to push your interest in the right direction. And if it's about, being a member of a group or here and there, why not? Now, how efficient is the group? Coming back to what Sasi was talking in a very direct and transparent way. Yeah, it might take maybe many years, or it might not be even being very efficient after many, many years. But at least you give it a shot, you try, and you don't put your eggs in the same basket.
Okay. Great. From my side, Sido, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
contribution this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again in future. All the best, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Sasha, obviously, you and Usman are going nowhere.
Sorry.
Right. Gentlemen,
I
yes.
was getting ready to say my closing remarks, but you stopped me.
Yeah. Well, do you have any additional points that you would like to make in general? There's specific something that you would like us to go back to? You know, I'm sitting with still the question in my mind. You're inviting an Ethiopia which has a very small GDP. We're talking about $125, $130 billion. Yes, you get 120 million people, but it is quite strife, a lot of strife and tensions within Ethiopia. It is landlocked. Why would I want somebody like that? Or is it because they would be the big player in the Horn of Africa, which kind of, you know, controls, if it had access to the sea, would control the entrance to the bottom end of the Red Sea or the exit from the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean?
I think one reason why, to me, if you look at the numbers, you see that Ethiopia has been growing at 10% for past between 2007 till 2017 or something. And if I remember correctly, the current number was around 6 to 7%. So it has been consistently growing at a very high rate. And I think that could be one of the reasons why Ethiopia has been invited compared to, let's say, Nigeria or Algeria, for example, right?
But you're still sitting with a huge inflation rate. We're talking, what, if I recall the last time I checked, in the 30s and the 40%. It is huge. Getting currency, foreign currency, there is a huge problem. The guys that I recall in Singapore trading in woodwork with LCs, and you take your 3 months waiting time, and it's always a challenge getting your money out. Yes, you can plan or you can price accordingly, but it still is a somewhat of a schlep. Why would I want to bring something like that into a BRICS Plus if you compare it to the rest?
Johan, I honestly am not an Africa expert. You are actually the resident expert.
You are.
University, but I have a question for you. I mean, contrary to the fact that, I mean, I know you wanted an answer from me, not from us, but I'm going to turn this into a question for you. What's in it for China to bring Ethiopia on board? I mean, because it connects to the point that I was going to make before Sido left. I wanted to mention that, but the way I see this whole grouping play out is ultimately who's going to prevail, whether it's India or China. We have to admit that is really what it is all about at the end of the day, right? Whether countries are rallying behind one of the two, and they have very strong leadership in both countries who have their own vision, they have their own ways of moving forward and striking alliances. And you know that, you know, media and the narratives can be biased towards one or the other, and I'm not picking a side here either way. But what I am trying to say is that ultimately the coalition is looking more like one of the countries or both countries have their interests aligned, and they want these countries to be part of this initiative, so that ultimately who has a higher say or a better say. I mean, I'm asking you, I don't know anything about Ethiopia per se and their interest in China or China's interest in Ethiopia, but keeping in mind the BRI and to the extent Africa has been involved, apart from South Africa, who else you think, I mean, of all the countries you had listed, you think Ethiopia tops the list? I mean, is there anything there geostrategically? I mean, I beyond that, I cannot think of an explanation as to why that would be the case. Yeah.
Well, if I have to answer my own question, because you're throwing that back at me, thank you very much. Looking at China has been quite involved in the infrastructure development in Ethiopia with the railway lines and roads, etc. You look at the trade balance, you'd see that there's a massive trade imbalance to the benefit of China there. And then you're sitting with the largest economy in the Horn of Africa, which is a strategically important part of the world. Very much, how would I put it? It is a sensitive part of the world and not a lot of stability, an unstable part of the world. So having Ethiopia on board and exercising influence there can be to the benefit of China, which is who was probably one of the pushes for Ethiopia to become a member. The reality is, I've read documents that say that Ethiopia wasn't going to be invited initially. And then Abiy Ahmed said, how can you not make the cradle of humankind a member of somebody like BRICS? And then Cyril Ramaphosa apparently went around and convinced the others we have to bring them on board. So that is kind of breaks down the whole thing. Yes, it is an important element. They were kind of elected, if those reports were true, as a kind of an afterthought because of Abiy Ahmed's point of view that, hey, why are we not being a member of this? But seen together with that, the strategically important role that the location plays, despite not having access to the sea directly, but it has via, Djibouti, where China actually influences a lot, through Lapset, the Lamu port, South Sudan, Ethiopia, a trade route, and through the port of Berbera that they're very much interested in Somaliland. So there are potential that has also been currently for the past 2-3 weeks, quite on part of the media, where they were speculating Ethiopia reaching out and getting access directly to the sea itself. And a bit of criticism as to the way they've gone about. Still, you're sitting with a very small economy, 125 billion, which is negligible in the greater scheme of things. I would have looked at others. You're sitting in the West Africa, there's nobody there. You could have looked at Nigeria. Good. Some people say Nigeria didn't actually, didn't hand in an application, but you're sitting with the largest economy. You're sitting with 200 million people. So as far as scale is concerned, and as far as economy size is concerned, it is a much better choice than would have been the case from Ethiopia. Other than the fact that from a geostrategic perspective, it probably doesn't have the benefit in a sensitive part of the world that Ethiopia has. Gentlemen, I think we are shortly running out of time. We've not have questions from the audience. Just want to make sure that I am right as far as that is concerned. Yes, I am concerned. Your final thoughts, the road ahead for a BRICS Plus. What do we see in future will pan out? How will it pan out? If you have any thoughts in this regard.
Well, I mean, I just think so something similar to what I just said like a few minutes ago about India versus China. I mean, I don't want to sound very reductionist, but at the end of the day, if we were to believe that this is going to become the voice of the global South, as many countries hope it would, and there's going to be a form and there's going to be substance to this grouping, and it's going to have some political clout, and whether it is the economic side or the soft power angle, whichever way you look at it, and we are really building a new global order. And that's the narrative that everybody's trying to spin from the West to the East. But then you need to have some facts that that actually match that hope. I mean, it's partly hope and partly fear. There's no real data, but that is where, I mean, down the road in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see a lot of these projects kick in, a lot of these relationships mature. So the question is, these and if the conflicts between these group members die, and if they find a very diplomatic way to move forward, I definitely think if India and China, I mean, it is asking for too much, but definitely if the two countries can come together on many fronts, and I think that is going to be that will be a wake-up call for the West, and really then there's something to really worry about. And until that happens, I think people are just going to watch the space and see how they operate with their smaller subgroups they are already part of, and what will happen. That's where I'll leave it at. So
yeah.
This one?
No, I think I agree with Sasi, and I think if the group really wants to become like a voice for the global South, right? probably they will expand much more rapidly in the coming years as well, given that you already have 40 applicants this year. If that trend continues, and if really they want, the goal is to be an alternative to G7 or G20, then I also see that the group may expand probably in the future.
On that note, do you see them institutionalizing, formalizing into a free trade area 10, 15 years down the line?
Probably it would, again, it might happen if the economic interests align. But as of right now, I don't think so that is a possibility. I don't think so that is a possibility, given that just because different countries within the bloc or within the grouping, they don't trade equally with each other, right? So take for example India and Russia, right? What will Russia gain by trading with India? Essentially, the trade, the exports that Russia gets from India is very minimal. So trading blocks or trading, if you have a trading agreement, that would basically benefit every country, not one country or two countries.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I agree. At this point, it looks a bit far-fetched, but we'll have to wait and see. But if there is one thing that these countries should do is to spare some thought and figure out what acronym they're going to be called. That sounds like a very mundane point to think about, but it is important. I mean, what are you going to call this grouping? I mean, so
if they invited Kenya, it would be BRICS. Right, BRICS.
Yeah, and you actually now add all of this, and I had a chat with one of my very good friends. I don't want to name him, but and it sounds like almost like unsubscribe. If you put all the things together and all the letters of the countries, and if India changes its name to Bharat, then it will become unsubscribed, and that's what one of my friends said. It's not mine, and I believe that is not boding well for the group. And so you want to be subscribed, right? So not unsubscribe. So, but that's just a lighter note. But that's where I see this group heading at the end of the day. So,
okay. Right, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been very interesting listening to your views. I think for them, if I may summarize my perspective, I think for them to be meaningful, they would need to transform themselves into a trade bloc. Whether it's going to happen is a different issue. They will need to formalize and institutionalize according to some form of, some policies and guidelines as to who becomes a member. They would need to have a conflict resolution mechanism in the real sense of the word, given the potential for conflict between the members of BRICS plus as it is currently. I do not see de-dollarization or the creation of a single BRICS currency, something which is going to happen in my lifetime. But I think there will be a much greater embracing of trading in own currencies. It's already taking place. Africa is going to save $5 billion per annum, which makes it one of the larger economies on the continent, just by not having to buy dollars, euros, and pounds in order to trade with each other. So yes, it'll be interesting to see whether this entity gets legs and it gets a body. Thank you for your views. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the members, the attendees, for listening to our resident experts. And please stay tuned for our next exciting episode on the STEPS Forum, which stands for Seminars and Talks on Executive Education and Postgraduate Studies of the College for Business and Economics at the UAEU. And on that note, thank you so much. Keep well.
Thank you for having
Thank you, Johan, for the invitation.
Thank you.
I need to thank you.